All right, welcome to your personalized deep dive.
Mm-hmm.
Today we're exploring this book, Don't Believe Everything You Think, by Joseph Nguyen.
Interesting.
And it's a really fascinating look at why we suffer,
Yeah.
and more importantly,
Yeah.
how to kind of break free from it.
Kind of stop. Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, the book starts with this question, and it really resonated with me.
Mm-hmm.
You know, do we actually experience more emotional suffering than is necessary,
That's a good question.
even when things seem to be going pretty well?
Yeah, that's a great question, right?
Yeah.
It's like, hey, things are good. Why am I still stressed?
Why am I still? Yeah.
Nguyen dives right into this idea that it's not actually the external events that are causing our suffering,
That's right.
but our own thoughts
It's our thoughts about the events.
about those events.
Exactly.
Yeah.
He uses this example of two people sitting in the same coffee shop.
Okay.
One is like
Yeah.
completely wound up
Yeah.
thinking about all the things that are going wrong in their life.
Right. Yep.
Well, the other is just enjoying the moment, watching the world go by.
Right.
Same coffee shop, but two completely different internal experiences.
Yeah. It's almost like
Yeah.
one person is choosing to suffer and the other is choosing to enjoy the moment.
Yeah.
I mean, I know it's not always that simple,
Yeah.
but
It's not quite that easy.
the idea that our thoughts have that much power
But it's the same idea.
is pretty mind-blowing.
It is, yeah. And
Yeah.
to illustrate this power, the book uses the analogy of two arrows.
Okay.
So think about the last time you missed a deadline at work,
Yeah.
that missed deadline.
Right.
That's the first arrow.
Yeah.
It's unavoidable.
It happened.
It happened.
Yeah.
But then comes the second arrow,
Okay.
the spiral of self-criticism,
Yeah.
the worry about what your boss will think, the fear that you'll get fired.
Right.
That second arrow is the suffering.
Right. So the second arrow is optional.
And that's the one we have a choice about.
Wow. I've never thought about it that way.
Right.
It's not about pretending
Yeah.
the first arrow didn't happen,
Right.
but about choosing how we react to it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the book argues that most of us aren't even experiencing reality directly.
Right.
Instead, we're experiencing a world built by our own thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
It's like we're all wearing these tinted glasses that color our perception of everything.
Oh, that's a great point.
That's why you can ask 100 people about the same event
Yeah.
and get 100 different opinions.
It's like we all think we're seeing the world objectively, but
Yeah.
really we're just seeing our own thoughts reflected back at us,
You got it.
which is kind of terrifying when you think about it.
It can be,
Yeah.
but it's also incredibly empowering
Right.
because if our thoughts are creating our reality,
Right.
then we have the power to change our thoughts
Yeah.
and therefore change our reality.
Okay, hold on. I feel like we're using the word thoughts a lot here.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a difference between
Yeah, good question.
like just having thoughts pop into our heads
Mm-hmm.
and actively thinking?
That's a great question, and Guillen makes a clear distinction between the two.
Okay.
He says thoughts are like the raw material,
Mm-hmm.
the sparks of ideas that come and go.
Yeah.
Think of them like popcorn kernels popping up randomly.
Yeah.
We don't really control them, they just happen.
Okay.
But thinking is what we do with those thoughts.
Okay.
It's the judging,
Right.
the analyzing,
The story created.
the story creating that we get caught up in.
Okay, so thoughts are neutral. They just are.
Right.
But it's the thinking.
It's the thinking that's the problem.
The adding our own commentary and judgments, that creates the problem.
Precisely.
Okay.
The book has this thought experiment I love.
Mm-hmm.
How much money do you want to make?
Okay.
When you hear that, a number probably pops into your head.
Yeah.
That initial thought is neutral, right?
Yeah, number.
It's just a number.
Yeah.
But then you start thinking about it.
Oh, I can see where this is going.
Right.
Suddenly I'm comparing myself to others.
Yeah.
Worrying about whether I'm ambitious enough,
Mhm.
feeling inadequate because my number isn't bigger.
And just like that,
Right.
we've gone from a neutral thought to a whole cascade of negative emotions.
Right.
That's the power of thinking.
So if thinking is the problem,
Mm-hmm.
is the solution to just like try and think positive,
That's what a lot of people think.
they plaster a smile on my face
Mm-hmm.
and pretend everything is perfect.
That's a common misconception.
Okay.
And Nguyen addresses it directly.
Mm-hmm.
It's not about forcing positive thoughts.
Okay.
Think about your happiest memory.
Mm-hmm.
Were you actively thinking positive thoughts in that moment?
You know, I think I was just feeling the joy.
Right.
I wasn't analyzing it or trying to make it last longer.
You were just present.
I was just completely present in the experience.
Exactly.
Yeah.
True joy and peace come from a state of being,
Okay.
not from forced positive thinking.
Mm-hmm.
The book uses the analogy of a speedometer.
Okay.
The more we think, the higher the needle goes.
Right.
And the more stress we experience.
Okay, so less thinking.
Less thinking.
More being.
More being.
Yeah.
Sounds simple enough.
Yeah, in theory.
But how do we actually do that?
That's the question.
I mean, can we really just turn our brains off?
Can we? Yeah.
Like, is that even possible?
Good question.
Okay, so less thinking, more being. But how do we actually quiet that mental chatter? I mean, it feels like my brain is a nonstop news channel, always broadcasting something.
You're not alone in that feeling. But instead of trying to force our minds to be quiet, what if we simply allowed them to settle naturally? It's like muddy water. You can't force the dirt to settle, but if you leave it undisturbed, the water eventually becomes clear on its own. That's a great visual. So we're not aiming for a completely blank mind, but rather just letting the noise settle down so we can see things more clearly. I like that.
And that brings us back to the three principles that Nguyen introduces: universal mind, consciousness, and thought. These principles work together to create our experience.
Okay, remind me again what this universal mind thing is all about. We talked about it briefly before, but it sounds pretty deep.
Think of it as the source code of the universe. It's the intelligence that underlies everything. The laws of physics, the growth of a tree, even that flash of insight you get when you're struggling with a problem. It's a force of pure potential and wisdom that we're all connected to.
So it's like we're all plugged into this universal power source, but sometimes we forget it's there.
Exactly. We get so caught up in our own little worlds and our own thinking that we lose touch with that source. And that's where consciousness comes in. It's our awareness, our ability to experience this universal mind and the world around us. It's what allows us to perceive, feel, and interact with reality.
Got it. So universal mind is the source code, consciousness is the operating system, and then there's thought, which, if I remember correctly, is where things tend to go off the rails.
Right. Thoughts are like the building blocks we use to create our individual realities. We take those sparks of inspiration from the universal mind, and then we use our thoughts to shape them into beliefs, opinions, and interpretations.
But we also said earlier that thoughts themselves are neutral, so when do they become the problem?
It's when we start clinging to them, judging them, and building stories around them. We forget that they're just temporary visitors. We treat them like permanent residents in our minds.
Oh, I know that feeling.
Well,
It's like when you have that one negative thought and suddenly it's taken up residence in your brain, playing on repeat.
and that's when the suffering starts. We get so attached to these thought-created stories that we forget about the peace and joy that's available to us in each moment.
Okay, so to recap, universal mind is the source of pure potential, consciousness allows us to experience it, and thought is how we personalize it. But often we end up personalizing it with a whole lot of unnecessary drama.
Perfectly put. And the good news is, once we understand this three-part system, we can start to see that we have more control over our experience than we realize. We're not just victims of our thoughts. We're the creators of them.
This idea of being a conscious creator is so intriguing, but if I'm being honest, it also feels a little daunting. Where do we even begin to shift that perspective?
Well, Nguyen suggests a powerful starting point that ties together everything we've been discussing: unconditional love and creation.
Okay, I was hoping we'd get back to this. I'm really curious to explore this concept further. How does unconditional love factor into all of this exactly? It seems like a big leap from talking about our thoughts.
It might seem that way at first, but it's actually the foundation of everything. Think about it. When we're caught up in our thinking, we're constantly judging ourselves and others, setting conditions for our happiness. We tell ourselves, I'll be happy when I achieve this, or I'll be worthy when I get that. But true fulfillment, according to Nguyen, doesn't come from achieving specific outcomes. It comes from a state of being.
So instead of chasing external validation, we need to cultivate a sense of peace and wholeness from within.
Exactly. Nguyen shares this really touching story in the book about his girlfriend, McKenna. He used to ask her why she loved him, and she'd simply say, I don't know, I just do. At first, it frustrated him because he could list all these reasons why he loved her. He wanted her to do the same.
I can relate to that. It feels like we always want to define and categorize everything, especially when it comes to emotion.
But what Nguyen realized is that her love was unconditional. It wasn't based on any specific qualities or actions. It just was. And that's the kind of love he's talking about cultivating for ourselves and others. It's about accepting ourselves as we are, flaws and all, without any conditions or expectations.
That's such a powerful concept. But how does this unconditional love translate to creation? We've talked about letting go of thinking, but how does that help us actually achieve our goals and bring our ideas to life?
When we create from a place of unconditional love, whether it's art, a business, or even a simple act of kindness, we're not attached to specific outcomes. We're not driven by the need for external validation or the fear of failure. We're simply expressing ourselves authentically, allowing our inner wisdom to guide us.
So it's like we're tapping into that universal mind we talked about earlier.
Exactly. We're letting go of the need to control and force things to happen, and instead we're trusting that the universe will support us in ways we might not even be able to imagine. We're essentially creating space for miracles to happen.
I love the sound of that. Creating space for miracles. But what about those times when our thoughts and emotions feel so overwhelming that it's hard to even imagine accessing that kind of peace and clarity? Like, what if we're dealing with anxiety, grief, or even just everyday stress? Does this approach still work?
That's a great question, and one that Gingian addresses in the book. He acknowledges that there will be times when our minds feel like a raging storm. And that's okay, it's part of being human. But even in the midst of that storm, there's the stillness at our core. It might be buried under layers of thoughts and emotions, but it's always there.
So it's like we have to learn to weather the storm without getting swept away by it.
Exactly. And the book offers some really practical tools for doing just that. It's not about pretending the storm isn't happening, but about finding that place of inner peace, even as the wind howls around us.
This is all starting to make so much sense, but I have to admit, I'm still struggling a bit with the practicality of it all. How do we take these abstract concepts like unconditional love and creating space for miracles and actually apply them to our everyday lives? I mean, I have a job, responsibilities, deadlines. It's not like I can just drop everything and meditate on a mountaintop all day.
I hear you.
Yeah.
And luckily, the book doesn't advocate for that either.
Yeah.
Instead, Guyen provides a framework for incorporating these principles into our everyday lives in ways that feel manageable and even enjoyable. And that's what we'll delve into in part 3 of our deep dive.
Okay, I'm definitely looking forward to that. All right, welcome back to our deep dive into Don't Believe Everything You Think.
Hmm.
We've covered a lot of ground so far, understanding how our thoughts create suffering, exploring those 3 principles: universal mind, consciousness, thought,
Right.
and even delving into the profound concept of unconditional love and creation.
Yeah, it's been quite a journey.
It has.
And now in this final part,
Yeah.
let's bring it all home
Right.
and talk about how to actually integrate these
Yeah.
principles into our daily lives.
Yes, please. I'm all about taking action.
Okay.
The book talks about creating a non-thinking environment.
Mhm.
That sounds amazing,
Yeah.
but honestly, I'm a little lost on what that actually looks like in practice.
Right.
I mean, is it even possible in our hyper-connected world?
It's a great question.
Yeah,
And you're right.
yeah,
It's not about escaping to a remote cave
right,
or disconnecting from the world entirely.
right.
It's more about being mindful of the things that trigger our thinking
Okay.
and consciously minimizing those triggers.
So it's like a decluttering project, but for our minds.
Exactly.
Okay.
Just like you might declutter your home by getting rid of things you no longer need or use, you can declutter your mind
Okay.
by becoming aware of the things that trigger stress,
Right.
anxiety, and overthinking.
Okay.
For some people, it might be a cluttered workspace. For others, it might be the constant barrage of notifications on their phone.
Oh, my phone is definitely a major culprit for me.
Yeah, I hear you.
That's like, it's a black hole of distraction.
It is.
And I know I'm not the only one who feels that way.
Yeah, you're not alone.
Yeah.
And that's why Nguyen emphasizes the importance of setting boundaries with technology.
Okay.
It's not about demonizing technology,
Right.
but about using it consciously and intentionally,
Right.
rather than letting it control us.
Okay, so maybe instead of
Right.
mindlessly scrolling through social media before bed,
Yeah.
I could spend that time reading a book
Mm-hmm.
or listening to calming music.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And maybe consider turning off those notifications that aren't absolutely essential.
Yeah.
It's about creating space
Right.
for your mind to quiet down
Yeah.
and reconnect with that inner peace.
It's like hitting the pause button
Yes.
on the mental noise so we can actually hear ourselves think, or rather not think.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And just as we can minimize the things that trigger our thinking, we can also actively cultivate things that promote a sense of peace and clarity.
Okay.
Spending time in nature,
Right.
listening to calming music,
Yeah.
practicing yoga or meditation.
Yeah.
These are all powerful ways to create a non-thinking environment.
You know, I've always wanted to try meditation,
Mm-hmm.
but I have this ingrained belief that I'm too busy to meditate.
That's so common.
Like, who has time to just sit around and do nothing?
I know.
Right.
That's common misconception.
Okay.
And the book addresses it head on.
Yeah.
Meditation isn't about clearing your mind completely
Mm-hmm.
or achieving some mystical state of enlightenment.
Right.
It's simply about taking a few minutes each day
Okay.
to focus on your breath.
Yeah.
Observe your thoughts without judgment
Right.
and allow yourself to just be.
Okay, that actually sounds doable.
Right.
Maybe I could start with just 5 minutes in the morning.
And see how it feels.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the beauty of it is that even a few minutes of daily meditation
Mm-hmm.
can have a ripple effect on your entire day.
Okay.
You might find yourself feeling calmer,
Right.
more focused,
Yeah.
and more resilient in the face of challenges.
This is all making so much sense.
Good.
But I have to admit, I'm still a bit skeptical about how this non-thinking approach
Mm-hmm.
translates to actually achieving our goals.
Right.
I mean, we can't just sit around meditating all day
Right.
and expect our dreams to magically manifest, right?
Of course not.
Okay.
It's not about passivity or inaction.
Right.
It's about finding that sweet spot
Okay.
between being and doing.
Okay.
We set intentions, we take inspired action,
Right.
and then we trust that the universe will support us in ways we may not be able to anticipate.
So we're not giving up on our goals,
Right.
but we're approaching them with a different mindset.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. A mindset that's rooted in peace and trust rather than fear and force.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And that brings us to this fascinating concept
Okay.
that Nguyen calls following your intuition.
Okay.
He dedicates a whole chapter to it in the book.
Oh, right. He talked about those gut feelings
Mm-hmm.
we often ignore.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
Okay.
And he encourages us to start paying attention to those subtle nudges,
Mm-hmm.
those whispers of wisdom
Yeah.
that often guide us in the right direction.
But what if our intuition leads us to something that
Hmm.
seems illogical or even scary?
Yeah.
Like, what if my gut tells me to quit my stable job
Okay.
and pursue a risky passion project?
That's where faith comes in.
Okay.
The book argues that trusting our intuition often requires us to step outside of our comfort zones,
Mm-hmm.
to embrace the unknown.
Right.
It's about surrendering control and trusting
Mm-hmm.
that even if we don't have all the answers,
Yeah.
we're being guided towards something greater.
This all sounds so liberating,
It is.
but also a little terrifying. It's
Yeah.
like we're being asked to let go of everything we've been taught about how to succeed in life.
In a way, yes.
Right.
It's about shifting from a mindset of scarcity and fear
Mm-hmm.
to a mindset of abundance and trust.
Right.
It's about recognizing that we're not alone in this journey,
Yeah.
that there's a universal intelligence
Mm-hmm.
that's always guiding and supporting us.
This has been such an incredible deep dive.
It has.
We've covered so much ground, from the root of suffering to the power of unconditional love and creation.
Mm-hmm.
It's a lot to process, but I feel like I'm walking away with a whole new perspective
Good.
on how to live a more peaceful and fulfilling life.
Me too.
Yeah.
And the best part is,
Yeah.
it's not about achieving some perfect state of non-thinking bliss.
Right.
It's about recognizing
Yeah.
when we've fallen back into those old patterns of thinking
Mm.
and gently guiding ourselves back to that place of peace and clarity.
Right.
It's a journey, not a destination.
And speaking of the journey, for those of you listening who want to delve deeper
Yes,
into these concepts, Nguyen's book is a treasure trove of wisdom.
it is.
He provides practical guides and frameworks for everything,
Mm.
from creating a morning ritual that sets you up for success to overcoming destructive habits.
It's a book you can revisit again and again,
Right.
each time discovering new insights and inspiration.
Well, on that note, it's time for us to wrap up this deep dive.
Okay.
I don't know about you, but I'm feeling incredibly inspired and empowered.
Me too.
Like I have a whole new set of tools for navigating the ups and downs of life.
And remember, as Nguyen beautifully states in the book, you are already all the love, joy, peace, and fulfillment you have ever wanted.
Wow.
It is only when we forget that fact and get caught up in our thinking that we do not see it.
So true.
Yeah.
Thank you for joining us on this journey of self-discovery.
Thanks for having me.
Remember, you're not alone on this path. We're all in this together. Until next time, keep diving deep.